Hello, I'm George Denison, a broadcaster at 4Player Network, and these are my top 10 games of 2018. My 10th favourite game of 2018 is Into the Breach, which is the follow-up game to FTL. And FTL was one of those games that everybody loves, and I feel like I should like it, but for whatever reason it never really sunk its hooks into me the way it did for a lot of other people. It's the sort of game where in the moment during a run I'm really into it, but when you die it really sucks because everything gets reset back to zero, what with it being a roguelike, and it can feel a bit dice rolly at times, like it's very easily to get screwed over very quickly in that game. So with that in mind, I wasn't really expecting to like Into the Breach that much, even though it is a very different kind of game. It still has that roguelike structure and the permadeath that were the things that ground me down a bit in FTL, but I decided to pick it up for the Switch because I just wanted something turn-based and easy to play on the Switch, so I thought I'd give it a shot, and in the end I ended up really liking it. It feels quite similar to chess in the way in that you've got this 8x8 grid, you've got different pieces that move in restricted ways on the board, and defending key spaces is as important as going on the attack. One of the things I really liked is the bite-sized feel of the gameplay, because every battle only lasts like a handful of turns, so it feels more like solving a little puzzle than like a big slog for a long-winded turn-based fight. You get all the information you need, so it's about positioning, it's about being smart with your moves. It's not just about attacking people all the time, but you're like pushing enemies into spaces so they'll attack each other, or you're pushing them onto a space where the ground will swallow them up the next turn. And there's lots of situations where you think you're completely overrun, you think it's all over, you've got 5 different enemies and they're all threatening different buildings, and you've only got 3 mechs to stop them. But that's what makes it so satisfying when you find like the smart way of dealing with it, when you do something like knock enemies into each other, or you push them into a square that's about to get hit by a fireball from a volcano. And because you always get all the information you need, you know you've only got yourself to blame when you screw something up. It can be tough, but dying didn't bum me out in the same way as it did with FTL. That's partly because you get new mechs to unlock, and that's very fun. That can change up how you strategize, the way you move, the way you attack, that changes your tactics. And I think of all the games on this list, this is the one I wish I'd spent a bit more time with, and I definitely want to find more time for it in 2019 to keep unlocking new mech sets, actually finish the campaigns. I haven't done that yet. I think it's a really great fit for the Switch because it's so easy just to pick it up and jump into a new run, which is why I can definitely see myself playing more Into the Breach next year, and it's definitely been one of my favourites of 2018. Dead Cells ended up being my palate cleanser game for 2018. This was always the first thing I'd want to jump into when I couldn't think of anything else to play. This game is so fast and the controls are so smooth. It's really zippy is the only way I can think of describing it. It's like my fingers instinctively want me to play it like every run, like it's a speed run, and I'm the sort of person who never speed runs anything, so I'll say this game has some really cool pixel art, and it also has one of the best and most satisfying ground pound moves in any game I've ever played. And besides that, there's lots of really cool loot in the game. I'm not normally the sort of person who cares all that much about loot, but this is a rare game that has me really excited when I get to pick up a new sword or bow or trap. You can end up with some really cool combos, like swords that shoot bombs when you swing them, or grenades that make enemies explode into worms that attack other enemies. It has a roguelite structure, but it feels so good to control, and you feel powerful enough at the start of a run that starting over isn't too much of a drag. Although I will say the length of runs mean it doesn't have that addictive quality that something like Rogue Legacy or Binding of Isaac has, where you want to jump straight back into a run after finishing the last one. Dead Cells, I kind of had to put it down for a bit after finishing a run, but then it's always the first thing I'd want to jump back into after taking a break. It also has some of the persistent qualities that help to make it feel like you're making progress even when you die, a bit like in Rogue Legacy, where you're putting cells into getting better loot sooner into a run, or getting more health potions to help you last longer in a run, that kind of stuff. But it does have a proper challenge curve. You're not just like brute forcing it. You do learn enemy attacks, and you learn through failure and persistence like you would in, say, a Souls game. I haven't quite finished this game yet. I've got to like the last level before the final boss, but this is one of those games where I'm probably going to say in this video that I'm geared to play more of it next year and finish it off, kind of like I did with Into the Breach. But let's be honest, I'm probably not going to find the time. I'll probably be saying this exact same thing about a bunch of really cool roguelikes and lights from 2019 as well. But whatever, even if I don't get around to finishing it, Dead Cells has still definitely been one of my favourites from this year, and that's why it's getting a place in my top 10. So I've played a few Spider-Man games over the years, the big one being Spider-Man 2, and the big draw of that game was the web swinging mechanics, because web swinging in that game felt like amazing. It was pretty much everything else kind of sucked about it though, so I was really looking forward to this new Spider-Man because I had really high hopes for the web swinging, but that was like about as far as my expectations went with it. I do think Insomniac really did nail the web swinging in this game. It has all like the momentum and verticality that you want from a game like this, and it's just like such a fun way to get around an open world. But what I wasn't expecting was the combat to be really good as well. It shares a lot of the same DNA as the Rocksteady Batman Arkham games, and it's not quite as good as that, but it's definitely still fun, and it ends up kind of having its own distinct feel to it, with a lot more emphasis on like verticality and aerial moves. It's really cool, I think, how they incorporated Spider-Man's moves and gadgets into the combat as well. So like there's a move where you can grab an object, you can grab a motorbike or a manhole cover and just swing it around your body for crowd control. That's like really super satisfying, things like that. The gadgets are really fun to use as well. I probably didn't use them enough, so things like the trip mine and the impact web. And on top of the combat, this also has like a pretty good story, I'd say. The voice acting and the motion capture were really well done. The writing was pretty good, and it all comes together to a pretty satisfying conclusion. And maybe not as blown away by it as some other people are, but I still enjoyed it in the end. I do have some issues with this Spider-Man though. I'd say the forced stealth sections, they're not too big of a deal at first, and they are a nice way to break up the pace, but towards the end they do kind of become a bit of a drag. Also, the open world that Insomniac have created, it looks really nice and detailed, but it does have some of the same issues that a lot of AAA open world games have, where what you're doing outside of the missions can feel a bit copy-paste and repetitive. Maybe it's a bit unfair to keep comparing it to Batman Arkham, but I kind of consider that to be the high watermark of this genre. And that series I felt just had a bit more of like a handcrafted feel by comparison, with its like challenges and Riddler trophies. This didn't really have that, but at the end of the day, even when that open world fatigue felt like it was starting to set in a little bit, the web swinging mechanics and the combat, those things were just fun enough to keep me coming back and pull me through the story. And it's testament to how fun those mechanics are that of all the open world games I've finished this year, this is definitely one of the first ones I want to go back and 100%. Also, taking selfies as Spider-Man, that's really fun. So web swinging and Spider-Man selfies get this into my top 10. I used to love the Smash Brothers games back in the days of like Nintendo 64 and the GameCube versions of those games, I played the first game to death back when it only had a handful of characters, and I spent a stupid amount of time playing Melee in both the single player and the multiplayer. But in the end, I burned myself out playing Melee, and that was mainly because of the multiplayer. My friends, they kind of figured out like which characters were, well, at least felt overpowered, and they just kept using those same characters over and over again. We always ended up playing the Hyrule Temple stage, and in the end it just sort of stopped being fun to play, so I turned my back on Smash for a very long time after that. And that's the reason why I missed out on the last 2 Smash games. And I wasn't even really planning on picking this one up, so it's only because I picked up Just Cause 4 and that turned out to be a huge letdown, which is the reason why I decided to trade it in for Smash Bros. Ultimate, because I thought Melee was a long time ago now, so why the hell not? But I'm actually enjoying Ultimate a lot. And I say I'm enjoying because I'm still very much in the middle of playing this. I've played this for many hours now, but I'm still working my way through the World of Light adventure mode and unlocking new stuff. And playing this has reminded me why I fell in love with Smash in the first place, because it's like once I got used to the Switch control layout, a lot of the muscle memory actually just came back very naturally, and I was like smashing out combos with the characters that I knew and was familiar with from the old games, like it was 2002 all over again. A part of me feels a little bit weird about putting Ultimate on this list. For one thing, I'm not actually very good at Smash, at that more granular fighting game level of skill anyway. Not that I'm like a button masher or I can't hold my own against some like slightly higher level AI, but I haven't even touched the multiplayer for this, and I guarantee that probably anyone in our community could come along and annihilate me very quickly in a match. And the weirder thing is that this game is like a great big compendium of Smash content. It's got like every Smash stage, every Smash fighter that's ever been in a Smash game. So for me, on the one hand, this is like experiencing 2 new games worth of Smash fighters and stages, and on the other, it's this big nostalgia trip for me with the fighters and music and stages from the first 2 games. But obviously real Smash fans already know most of the stuff that's come in the games before, and I can't even imagine what it's like for somebody who's never played a Smash game before, what's coming into this one. But no matter how good or bad I technically am and how much content is technically new to the series, the fact is I'm getting like a way bigger kick out of Smash Bros. Ultimate right now than I thought I would. And like I say, this doesn't come from any deep love or understanding of its fighting game mechanics. It's just fun to play as Captain Falcon and punch Mario in the face until he flies off the stage, and then you unlock a bunch of stuff and bask in all the music and the references and everything else. I'm enjoying the World of Light adventure mode, but for the most part I've kind of just been playing through the classic arcade mode over and over again, unlocking stuff, trying out new characters that I'm not familiar with, and re-familiarising myself with the ones from the first 2 games that I do know. And there's like so much stuff in this game. There's so many fighters, there's so many spirits, there's so many stages, there's so much music. So I'm kind of treating it like this huge ball pit of Nintendo nostalgia that I can just dive into and have fun with. And there's still so much stuff I haven't seen and unlocked. I haven't even really figured out who my main is yet, although pretty sure it's probably Ganondorf with what I played so far, but I don't know. Even with the limited amount of time I've spent with Smash Bros. Ultimate this year, I think I've definitely had enough fun with it to include it here on my top 10 list. So Chuchel is the game that's at my number 6 spot. This is a very funny and short point and click by the same people who made Machinarium and Botanicula and some other games that are quite similar. I'm not sure how much I can really say about this one, other than this game made me laugh myself stupid for about 2 hours straight when I streamed this earlier this year. The only other game I've played by Amanita Design is Botanicula, and I thought that was also very funny and charming as well. A lot of Chuchel, it's still quite basic in terms of puzzles, where you're really just figuring out the right order to click on a bunch of objects in this like series of sketches. But I don't really mind, because everything you do click on, it always leads to some kind of hilarious slapstick gag. And And I do like how they spice things up by working in some nice little mini games, kind of like pastiches of Pac-Man and Space Invaders. Basically, this game's on here because it made me laugh harder than any other game in 2018. I thoroughly recommend checking it out if you're looking for a game that's going to put a smile on your face. So, I've got a confession to make. I haven't actually played a God of War game until this year. And I wasn't actually expecting it to be, for this God of War to be that great after seeing it at E3. I picked it up after it got high reviews and people started saying good things about it. And ended up being kind of blown away by it. A lot of it has to do with the presentation. I think the camera work is amazing with the single track shot effect they created. It still blows me away how it seamlessly transitions from cinematic moments to gameplay and back as part of the same scene, how smooth and unbroken it all is. Several times I'd enter a new environment like the forest, or there'd be a moment like meeting the world serpent, and my jaw would kind of be on the floor because of how amazing and pretty this looks. But it's not just about the presentation. The combat isn't super deep like a Souls game, but it is still fun. The attacks feel really weighty and the feedback you get is great, like the slow-mo when you perform a parry. I love the axe. I know I'm not the first person to say this, but the way you can press a button to recall it from anywhere in the world and have it fly back into your hand, that never gets old. Although there isn't a huge amount of variety in the bosses you fight, the ones you do, like the ones with the stranger, are probably some of my favourite set-piece moments from this generation. I think maybe even better than Naughty Dog in some ways. Might be a controversial thing to say, but there you go. The world structure feels really good as well. It feels open enough to feel like there's lots of stuff to explore, and it doesn't feel too linear, but it's also not so sprawling that it detracts from the story experience they're going for. It also has one of the coolest ways of doing fast travel I've seen. But I think what clinches the deal is the writing and the relationship between Kratos and Atreus. The acting is really good for both of them. The writing is really good. There's kind of as many small moments of dialogue between Kratos and Atreus that stick in my mind after finishing this as there were like big fights and set pieces. Also, it kind of piqued my interest for Norse mythology a bit. Wasn't that interested in it before, but actually ended up reading a bit more about it after playing this game, so that's cool. My one small gripe, which I guess would probably be a bigger gripe for some people who are really into their numbers and their deep RPG systems, is I didn't really get much out of the loot system. It's kind of fun to mess around with the different runic summons, but I didn't really feel compelled to create a build as such. Maybe that's just me and other people got more out of it. I was more into it for the story and the action, and the numbery stuff didn't really do much for me. Kind of hard to talk about this too much without spoiling things, but this is where it is on my list because it had so many great moments, whether they were big set pieces or small moments of character development. It's just damn great, amazingly presented, really well written game with satisfying action, and it's here at my number 5. My number 4 game on my list is a mobile game, which is not the type of game I normally play at all. I picked this one up after I saw it appear on a lot of end-of-year lists, on like a list of game developers' favourite games of the year. So I thought it looked interesting that I'd give it a shot. And I thought Florence was a really interesting way to tell a story about the highs and lows of being in a relationship. So obviously, as you can probably see, the art and the music of this is wonderful. It's got so much charm to it, I think. And this game's very, or whatever you want to call it, this very narrative-focused experience. It kind of feels like a interactive comic book at a lot of places. The story it's telling is not super original, but I feel like the way it tells it is actually quite unique. It does some quite clever things with some basic mechanics and little moments represented as little mini games. And it tells a lot of its story through interaction instead of dialogue, which I think is quite nice. So for example, there's like a conversation system where to answer you have to piece together these pieces of a puzzle, and the puzzle gets easier to solve as the couple in the story get to know each other better, until there's like just one piece that you have to put in, which really communicates that feeling when you're in a relationship where you can say things more easily and you're like more at ease with each other the more you get to know them. If you're not familiar with Florence, I recommend going into it blind the same way I did, because like I said, the story it's nothing mind-blowing, but I think the way the art, the music and the interactive storytelling come together, it's just so charming, and I think it's kind of moving as well a little bit in places. This game's very short. I recommend playing it through in one sitting if you can, but I thought it was very effective. The presentation and the way it told its story just made it stick in my mind more than a lot of the other stuff I played this year, and that's why it's here in my top 5. I really liked Papers, Please. It was on my top 10 of 2013, but I haven't really been following what Lucas Pope has been up to since. So Obra Dinn actually kind of snuck up on me a little bit. It's a rare example of a good detective game that actually demands you to use deductive reasoning and pay really close attention to, I guess, our crime scenes. So in this game, you're an insurance adjuster who has to figure out how each member on this ship, the Obra Dinn, died and who killed them. And at first, it's very overwhelming. You've got to wrap your head around how the game works, the interface, the pace it kind of flows at, and you go through loads of different memories at first, and it's at the start it's a little bit more obvious. The characters are saying the names of other crew members and how they're related and things like that out loud, but soon you're left with all these people that you have to get really clever with figuring out who they are. You have to use things like accents, turns of speech, what they're wearing, where they're standing in relation to other characters, and other ways that are even more subtle than that. There's been loads of times where I felt like I was kind of banging my head against a wall a little bit, like I scoured every detail and still had no way of identifying over 40 different people on this ship. But then I'd look a little bit closer or find a slightly more lateral way of thinking about the problem, and a bit like in something like The Witness, you get these aha moments where the game will confirm a set of 3 fates as correct, and it's that feeling when the details all slot into place and the screen goes black and you get that well done message. That's been one of the most satisfying feelings of the year for me. It's tough because these moments are what made the game for me and why it's so high on my list, but I can't really talk about them without spoiling things. But I'll say I loved how this game pushed me to really think a bit more creatively about how you try and identify people and how they died. It's a really cool way of telling a story as well, because you have to piece together what happened out of order, and this game goes to some pretty crazy places you might not expect at first. I love the presentation of this game as well. It looks like nothing else I've played, with the monochrome line drawing style. At first I found the way the style can obscure the detail slightly annoying, but in retrospect I appreciate how that actually forces you to get more creative in deducing who's who and how they died. The music's amazing as well, and I love the way it all comes together in these freeze frame death scenes, and it looks so stylish. Return of the Obra Dinn, it was a big surprise for me. I loved figuring it all out and piecing it all together. I know everyone said glowing things about it at 4-player, but if you haven't played it yet, I say you should definitely check it out. One of my most anticipated games from this year was Frostpunk, because it's from 11-Bit Studios, the guys who made This War of Mine, which was my second favourite game of 2014. And they also made the Anomaly games, and I enjoyed them very much as well. And after Frostpunk, I think I'd probably call 11-Bit one of my favourite indie studios. Frostpunk has a similar vibe to this War of Mine, where you're trying to keep a group of people alive in a very dire situation. In this case, stopping them from freezing to death in a post-apocalyptic world. But this is on a much bigger scale. You're dealing with hundreds of people, not just 5 or 6. And this time it's a city builder. And like with this War of Mine, 11-bit do an amazing job of creating this bleak atmosphere with the music, the art design, the sound design. It's this slow, sad background music and sounds when you've selected a building, like an infirmary, you can hear crying and coughing in the background. You can see the people trudging out in the snow to collect resources. It's such an engrossing experience, and it's one of those games you mean to play for an hour and you end up playing it into the early hours of the morning. The city building mechanics are really satisfying. It's really fun to see your city slowly building outwards as you research more technology that lets you mine more resources and makes life more bearable for your citizens. But it's the sense of escalation that makes this game so intense, because things get worse and worse as the temperature gets colder. You start to run low on resources and you have to accommodate more people. The game gradually throws more crises that you have to deal with, and that forces you to make tougher decisions as things get more desperate. Like, are you going to sign a law that forces children to work in dangerous conditions so you've got more hands to collect resources? Or do you let surgeons amputate people with frostbite so you can keep them alive and potentially get them working again by creating prosthetic limbs? It's a little bit on the nose and not very subtle in terms of like ethical dilemmas, but it works. It puts you in difficult situations where you've got to balance doing the ethical thing that might keep your people happy and makes you look good as a leader, but that might screw you over when it comes to the bigger picture. Balance that with doing things that might make you unpopular in the moment, but you know will help your group in the long run. And you've got literal hope and discontent meters to balance as well, and that adds to the pressure. So in the late game you can end up on the verge of being kicked out of the city if you max out your discontent meter. All this stuff comes together to create these super tense emergent storytelling moments. Like, for example, in one of my scenarios I was hours away from having a group of outsiders launch an attack on my city, so I needed wood to build defences that would protect us, but I hadn't managed resources well enough up to that point. I didn't have the wood or steel to do it, so I'm going around tearing down infirmaries and factories as the minutes tick away, watching hope start to plummet just to scrape the right amount of materials together. Then I'm like forcing people to build the defences, literally shouting at the screen to make them go faster, and I won the scenario with just a few seconds to spare. It was the most amazing, like, emergent feeling. And that's just one example. There were scenarios where I got thrown out of the city the day before a storm blew over, ones where I ended up becoming like a dictator and rounding up a splinter group of people and having them publicly beaten to stop them leaving the city. Ones where I only managed to survive by creating a religious cult. This game really takes you to some like crazy places. I think when it comes to describing the appeal of Frostpunk, Nolan probably put it best on one of the podcasts from this year, when he said it's stress, but the good kind of stress. I thought it was a properly nail-biting experience, and it's definitely going into my top 5. So, my game of the year for 2018 is Subnautica. So this was a game that I didn't touch when it was in early access. I heard some really good things about it, but survival games aren't normally my thing, so I picked it up after it came out of early access, and really more out of curiosity than anything else. But this ended up turning into an obsession for me this year that I sank over like 50 hours into. The game world for this is so beautiful and so atmospheric, but also terrifying as you're exploring deeper and deeper under the ocean. I think this is probably one of like the best open world games I think I've played, because it's not like just like your standard Ubisoft sandbox where you're basically given a map screen to unfog and a bunch of copy-paste activities to knock off like a giant checklist. You're just dumped into this giant ocean and you have to figure out how to explore and survive it. This is also one of like the most scariest and intense games I've played, and that's partly due to the fact that you don't know what you're going to find as you explore deeper into these dark caverns and like the bottom of the ocean floor. You've got the tension of always having to keep an eye on your oxygen levels and your hunger and your thirst. So if you don't plan ahead or you bite off more than you can chew, you can quite easily end up drowning or dying. The Reaper Leviathans, also, they're terrifying. They're probably one of my favourite horror creatures ever, because you learn to recognise the sound that they make. So you'll hear them roaring off in the distance, and that's how you know they can see you, even if you can't see it. So they can jump out at you and kill you any minute. And that just creates this incredible tension, and it really made me jump out of my skin like quite a few times. The game world is beautiful as well. There's so many times where I'd explore a new biome when after I just upgraded my equipment to that's when you can explore a little deeper than before, and you see these like giant lit up bulb shapes in the distance, or an enormous coral that's lit up like a Christmas tree, or you find an island way off from your crash base and it's full of alien plants. And it's got so many of these like whoa moments, like it really feels like you're an explorer stumbling into these incredible alien biomes. And there's no map screen, so you've got to orient yourself based on your compass and using beacons. You've actually got to get creative about how you navigate the world, and it gets crazier the deeper you go. Like, I'm going further and further down into these dark caves and finding these giant skeletons and ghost jellyfish, and then getting lost in these lava caverns. And some of it is like properly jaw-dropping stuff. It really feels like you're venturing into the bowels of this unknown alien planet. And those moments really felt properly earned and satisfying for me, partly because you actually have to explore. It doesn't necessarily tell you where to go apart from giving you a few hints and maybe the odd waypoint. And it's partly because it has this really nice crafting system that fits so neatly with the pace of the exploration. So I never felt like I was crafting anything small or insignificant. It's always like everything you knew you crafted is like a major quality of life improvement. So you get a bigger oxygen tank. That makes a huge difference because now you can explore deeper and get more materials to build other stuff. And then maybe you get the sea glide, and that's a huge deal because suddenly you can get around so much faster. And eventually you're at this point where you're piloting giant submarines, and that was an incredible moment when you build your first Cyclops, and it's just like you've gone from being dropped in the ocean with nothing but this like small survival pod to piloting this enormous submarine, and you're firing torpedoes and going out to the furthest edges of the map. And it may sound a bit corny, but it actually felt like a journey to me, and all of it was driven by this desire to just see what's out there in this beautiful, amazingly crafted world. And like, I was getting properly obsessed by this game. I was like thinking about it and like planning expeditions in my head when I was at work or like going to sleep, and like it really wormed its way into my brain. And I haven't even touched on stuff like the base building, that's something I never thought I'd be into. So there's this really satisfying thing of building a place for yourself where you can store all your materials, and then you're starting to put furniture in it and it starts to feel like a little home. And the story, even though it's like a nice touch, that's a light touch, that is also a nice touch. And what's in it is still really good. It goes to some quite interesting places towards the end that maybe you wouldn't expect. And it definitely doesn't feel like a survival game that just exists for the sake of itself. That it's actually got some really nice, well-written world building and a proper narrative with a satisfying conclusion. And the sound design in this game is incredible. Like when you're exploring and you stumble across a new area and then the really chill music slowly fades in, it gives the whole thing this really cinematic vibe. Or you're going through these dark caves with just like a flashlight, and then you'll hear some weird alien noise in the distance, and you're like, what the fuck is that? It's like, this is one of the most immersive games I think I've played, and I think the sound has a lot to do with that, actually. I could go on for ages about all the cool moments I've had with this game this year, all the things I love about it, but I'm just going to leave it here by saying this is probably one of my favourite open world games. This is probably one of my favourite exploration games, and it is definitely my game of the year for 2018 by quite some distance. I hope you've enjoyed watching my top 10 games of 2018. I just want to give an honourable mention to Dusk, which is a really good game that just narrowly missed the list. And I'd also be really keen to hear your thoughts on my choices and your own choices in the comments. Thanks for watching.